There's a kind of giving that nobody asks you to start, and so nobody ever thinks to ask you to stop. You just keep doing it. You keep writing the check, keep filling the tank, keep making the drive. And one morning you realize you've been doing it so long that the people receiving it have confused your generosity with furniture. Something that was always there. Something that didn't require a thank you because it didn't require a decision. I learned the difference on a Friday. My name is Joel Pemberton. I am 48 years old. I have been a residential contractor in Dayton, Ohio for 22 years. I frame houses. I hang drywall. I replace load-bearing beams in basements where the previous owner didn't notice the crack until floors started sloping. I own my own home. Paid off 9 years ago. A 3-bedroom on Birchwood Lane with a detached garage and a backyard I keep mowed because I like the way cut grass smells on Thursday evenings. I drive a 2015 Honda Civic. Silver. 143,000 miles. I bought it from a retired school teacher named Gail Hoffman on April 9th, 2015 for $14,200 cash. It has never once left me on the side of the road. Welcome to Quiet House Stories. Get comfortable and remember the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to love it here. My son's name is Aaron. He is 28. He works in pharmaceutical sales, the kind where you drive a company car to medical offices and leave samples in the lobby and tell yourself you're changing the world. He's good at it. He's charming. He has his mother's jaw and my stubbornness, and those two things together have gotten him further than either one would have alone. I have been paying Aaron's gas on my credit card since he was 22. I added him as an authorized user of the summer after he graduated because he was between jobs for 3 months, and I didn't want him sitting in an apartment with an empty tank and no way to get to interviews. That was 2020. The arrangement was supposed to last 3 months, maybe 4. It is now 2026. He has had a full-time job with a company car and a $74,000 salary for 4 years, and I am still paying for his gas. Not because he asked me to keep paying, because he never asked me to stop. I am not a dramatic man. I don't keep score, or at least I didn't think I did. But the thing about quiet giving is that it builds a ledger in your head, whether you want it to or not. And the thing about that ledger is you don't read it until somebody gives you a reason to open it. Aaron gave me a reason on a Tuesday in September. He pulled into my driveway at 6:40 in the evening in a silver Nissan Altima that his company provides, and beside him in the passenger seat was a woman I had not met before. Her name was Kelsey. She was 26, worked in marketing at the same company, and smiled like someone who had recently been told she was about to meet a nice man with a small house and a reliable personality. I liked her immediately. I shook her hand on the porch and told her to come inside. We sat in the kitchen. I made coffee, the French press, not the drip machine, because I wanted to seem like a man who still cared about small details. Kelsey complimented the backyard. She asked about the detached garage, and I told her I keep my tools in there, organized by function, labeled with a Brother P-Touch label maker I bought in 2019 for $29.99. She laughed. Aaron didn't. He sat with his arms crossed and his knee bouncing under the table, the way he always does when he's waiting for a visit to be over. I asked Kelsey how long she'd been with the company. She said 2 years. I asked Aaron if he'd shown her around Dayton yet. He said, "There's not much to show, Dad." He said it the way you'd say it about a town you'd already decided you were better than. Kelsey looked at me and then at her coffee and didn't say anything. I liked that about her. She knew when to let a moment pass without fixing it. I showed them the porch out back, the chair I sit in on Sunday mornings with the paper, the rose bushes along the fence that I planted in 2018 because my mother had rose bushes, and I wanted something in the yard that reminded me of her hands. Kelsey said, "These are beautiful, Mr. Pemberton." Aaron said, "Dad, we should probably get going." He'd been in my house for 35 minutes. He hadn't asked me how I was doing. He hadn't asked about the Barton remodel I'd mentioned on the phone the week before. He hadn't asked about anything at all, because asking requires the acknowledgement that the person you're asking has a life worth asking about. At 7:15, they stood up to leave. I walked them to the driveway. And that is where it happened. Kelsey looked at my Civic parked in front of the garage and said, "Oh, is that yours?" Not unkindly. Just a question. The kind of question that doesn't mean anything until somebody decides to answer it wrong. And Aaron put his arm around her shoulder and said, "Don't worry, that's temporary. He's been driving that thing forever." He said it with a half laugh. The kind of laugh that invites the other person to laugh with you. Kelsey did not laugh. She just looked at me, and I looked at my son. I said, 11 years. I said it without adjusting my tone. Bought it from a school teacher named Gail Hoffman for $14,200. Runs just fine. Aaron said, "Yeah, Dad, I know. I'm just saying, you could upgrade." I could upgrade. I want you to understand something about that sentence. I could upgrade the car that has 143,000 miles and has never left me stranded, the car I paid cash for, the car I drive to job sites at 6:30 in the morning, while my son's gas bill comes to me at $287 a month on my Chase Visa. I could upgrade. My son, who has not once in 6 years offered to take over his own fuel costs, was standing in my driveway, suggesting I spend money differently. The math of that sat in my chest like a stone I had swallowed without chewing. I nodded. I said, "Drive safe." I watched them pull away. The Altima's taillights turned left on Birchwood and disappeared behind the Henderson's maple tree. I went back inside. I washed the French press. I dried it. I set it on the second shelf where it always goes. And I sat down at my kitchen table. There are things you see clearly only after you've been sitting alone for 10 minutes in a quiet house. Not because the house gives you wisdom, because it gives you nothing else to look at. I sat in the kitchen with the overhead light off and the stove light on, just enough yellow to see the grain in the table. My white coffee mug was still warm from the pot I'd made for Kelsey. The refrigerator hummed its low, steady hum, the one it's been making since I replaced compressor in 2021. Outside, a dog barked twice on Birchwood Lane, and then stopped like it had made its point. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that. Anger is a young man's fuel, and I have not been young for a while. What I felt was something quieter. It was a feeling of a man who has been handing somebody something every month for 6 years, and just realized the person receiving it doesn't know what it costs. Not the dollar amount, the principle, the quiet, weekly act of deciding that your son's comfort matters more than your own acknowledgement. I had confused generosity with love. Aaron had confused it with obligation. And the distance between those two mistakes is the distance between a man who gives freely and a man who has been taken for granted so gradually that he didn't notice until somebody called his car a joke. I picked up my coffee mug. I took one sip. It was cold. I set it back down. And I knew what I was going to do. I didn't do it that night. I am not impulsive. Impulsive men make decisions that feel good at midnight and feel foolish by Wednesday. I am a contractor. I measure twice. I cut once, and then I don't cut again. That night, though, I did something I had never done before. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and pulled up the Chase credit card statements going back to June 2020. I looked at every line item with Aaron's name on it. Shell Station, BP Sunoco, Shell again, Shell again. The charges average $287 a month, and I know that because I opened a calculator app and added them up 1 month at a time, the way you add anything that's been accumulating without your permission. June 2020, $194. July, $213. By 2022, it was over $300 most months because gas prices had gone up and Aaron had started driving to Cincinnati on weekends to see friends. I didn't stop. I scrolled through 72 months of statements, and when I was done, the number on the screen was $20,664. I stared at that number for a long time. It is not a large number in the way that large numbers appear in stories. It is not a mansion or a trust fund or an inheritance. It is the kind of number that only means something to the man who earned it $287 at a time while driving a car his son called temporary. I closed the laptop. I didn't do anything else that night, but the number stayed. Wednesday morning, I went to a job site on Catalpa Drive, a kitchen remodel for a couple named the Bartons. I spent 4 hours pulling old tile off a backsplash and thinking about nothing except grout lines and adhesive residue. That is the thing about working with your hands. Your mind goes where it needs to go, and your body stays useful in the meantime. By noon, I had the backsplash clean, and a decision I hadn't made yet sitting in the back of my head like a nail I hadn't driven. I called my brother Dennis on the drive home at 1:45. Dennis is 53, retired Army, lives in Columbus. About an hour and 12 minutes on I-70 depending on whether you hit the construction near Springfield. He is the kind of man who listens without interrupting, and then says one sentence that lands like a nail gun. I told him what Aaron said. I told him about the credit card, the 6 years, the $287 a month average. I told him about Kelsey and the driveway, and the word temporary. Dennis was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he said, "You know what Dad would have done?" I said, "Dad would have done it that night, and he would have been right." Dennis said, "But you're not Dad. You'll do it when you're ready. Just make sure you're doing it for the right reason." I said, "What's the right reason?" "Because the boy needs to know what a tank of gas costs when it comes out of his own wallet. Not because you're punishing him. Because you're finished pretending it doesn't matter." I said nothing for a moment. I passed the Shell station on Route 9, the one with the 2 pumps and the flickering sign, and I thought about Aaron pulling in there with a car that has my name on the account and his name on the plastic, and how those two things are not the same thing at all. Then I said, "I'll call you Friday." He said, "I know you will." That conversation lasted 6 minutes and 41 seconds. I know because I glanced at my phone after I hung up. It was the most useful 6 minutes and 41 seconds I had spent in a long time. I want to tell you something about Aaron that I haven't said yet, not because it excuses anything, but because it explains the shape of it. Aaron's mother, my ex-wife, Linda, left when he was 9. She moved to Scottsdale with a man she met through her job at a dental supply company. She told me on a Sunday, packed on a Tuesday, and was gone by Thursday. That was March 2007. Aaron stood in the driveway, the same concrete, and watched her car pull out and did not say anything. He was wearing a Reds cap I had bought him at the ballpark the previous summer. He wore that cap every day for 4 months. He wore it to school. He wore it to bed. His teacher called me in April and asked if everything was okay at home, and I said yes and meant no and kept showing up anyway. I raised him alone after that. I drove him to school every morning at 7:15. I packed his lunches, turkey on wheat, no mayo, goldfish crackers in a Ziploc bag, juice box, napkin with a small note I wrote every morning before he woke up. I wrote those notes for 9 years, from 3rd grade through his senior year. That is roughly 1,620 napkin notes. And I know that because I am the kind of man who counts things not because the number matters, but because the counting keeps you honest about what you've given. Some of those notes said, "Have a good day, buddy." Some said, "Proud of you." Some, "In the hard years," the years when Aaron wouldn't talk about his mother, and I wouldn't talk about the fact that the house felt like a building with one wall missing. Some of those notes just said, "I'm here." I went to every parent-teacher conference. I sat in the bleachers at every baseball game with a thermos of coffee and a folding chair I brought from home, because the metal benches made my back hurt after the 2nd inning. I was the father who showed up, not because showing up was remarkable, but because the alternative was letting my son believe that leaving was normal. And somewhere in all of that, I taught Aaron something I didn't mean to teach him. I taught him that I would always be there, that my presence, my labor, my money, my time, these things were permanent. Fixtures, furniture, the kind of thing you lean on without thinking about whether it is feelings. Aaron didn't mock my car because he's cruel. He mocked it because he has never had to wonder what a man gives up to keep giving. That is my fault as much as it is his. I spent 19 years making sure he never felt the absence of his mother, and in doing so, I made sure he never learned to feel the presence of his father. He took me for granted the way you take gravity for granted. Not because you don't need it, but because it has never once failed to show up. But understanding the wound doesn't mean you leave the knife in. Thursday, I drove to the Chase branch on Wilmington Pike. I sat in the parking lot for 3 minutes with the engine off. A woman walked past with a stroller. The radio played something I didn't recognize, some country song with a guitar line that sounded like it was trying too hard. I turned it off. Inside, I spoke with a banker named Denise Tran. Young woman, glasses, efficient. I asked her one question. If I remove an authorized user from my credit card online, does the other person get notified? She said, "No, sir. The card just stops working the next time they try to use it." I said, "Thank you." She asked if there was anything else. I said there wasn't. I drove home. That evening, I heated leftover chili on the stove and ate it standing at the counter with a spoon and a piece of cornbread I had made the previous Sunday. The cornbread was 3 days old and dry at the edges. I ate it anyway. Some men sit down for meals. I have been eating standing up for 19 years, and I am not about to change now. The kitchen was clean. The French press was on the second shelf. The white mug was in the drying rack. Everything in its place. I have always been a man who puts things where they belong. It is perhaps the only skill that has never let me down. Friday, October 11th, 2:15 in the morning. I was awake because I am always awake at 2 a.m. on nights when I have decided something. The house was quiet. The stove light was on, that small yellow glow that has kept me company more nights than I can count. My laptop was open on the kitchen table next to a glass of water I had poured and not touched. I logged into the Chase credit card portal. I navigated to manage authorized users. I clicked remove next to Aaron Pemberton. The system asked me confirm. I confirmed. The whole thing took 3 minutes and 47 seconds. 3 minutes and 47 seconds to end 6 years of quiet subsidy. The math of that should bother me more than it does. I closed the laptop. I picked up the glass of water. I drank half of it. I set it back down. Outside, the street was empty. No cars. No dogs. Just the sound of the furnace clicking on in the basement, and the faint hum of the transformer on the pole at the end of the block. Birchwood Lane, at 2:19 in the morning, is the quietest place I know. There is a particular kind of quiet that falls over a man when he has just done something he should have done 3 years ago. It is not satisfaction. It is not relief. It is closer to the feeling of setting down a bag you didn't realize you were carrying until your shoulders started to ache. You stand up straighter. You breathe differently. And you wonder why you waited so long. And then you stop wondering, because the answer is always the same. You waited because you loved the person you were carrying, and love makes patient men out of practical ones. I went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. 9 days passed. 9 days of being Joel Pemberton, residential contractor, father, quiet man on Birchwood Lane, who drives a silver Civic and keeps his grass mowed and his tools labeled. 9 days of ordinary. I finished the Barton's backsplash on Monday. I started a deck repair in Centerville on Thursday. Pressure-treated lumber, 14-foot joists. A homeowner named Welch who brought me iced tea at 11 a.m. and didn't ask me to explain my process. I like clients who let me work. On a Sunday, October 20th, for 47 in the afternoon, my phone rang. Aaron. I was sitting on the back porch with the paper and the white mug, half full of coffee that had gone lukewarm. I looked at the screen. I let it ring. It rang again, and again. By 5 p.m., I had 8 missed calls. At 5:12, he sent a text. Dad called me back. Car got declined at Shell on Route 9. What's going on? At 5:19, seriously, Dad, call me. At 5:34, he called again. I was in the garage by then, reorganizing a bin of socket wrenches I've had since 2004. My father gave me the first 3. The 3/8, the half-inch, and the 5/8. The Christmas I was 16. I've added to the set since then, but those 3 are still the ones I reach for first. I set my phone face down on the workbench and continued sorting. 3/8, half-inch, 5/8. Some men meditate. I organize socket wrenches. The result is the same. Your mind goes quiet and your hands stay busy, and by the time you're done, the thing that was bothering you has either resolved itself or clarified into something you can act on. By Monday morning, the count was 22 missed calls and 11 text messages. The texts escalated in the way you'd expect. The first 3 were confused. The middle 4 were irritated. The last 4 were angry. The final one, sent at 11:47 p.m. Sunday, read, "This is ridiculous. Call me." I did not call him. I want you to understand something about not calling. It was not cruelty. It was not punishment. It was the act of a man who had said everything he needed to say at 2:15 on a Friday morning with a laptop and a glass of water, and who did not feel the need to explain the receipt to the person who hadn't been paying the bill. He showed up on Tuesday, October 22nd, 6:18 in the evening. I heard the Altima pull into the driveway. The particular sound of tires on concrete that you learn to recognize when you've lived in the same house for 17 years. I was in the kitchen making coffee. The drip machine this time, not the French press. Some days are French press days. Tuesdays after your son shows up uninvited are drip machine days. Aaron knocked once and let himself into the side door the way he always has since he was tall enough to reach the handle. He was wearing a blue polo shirt and khakis, and the expression of a man who has had to pay for his own gas for the first time in 6 years and did not enjoy the experience. He said, "Dad, what happened to the card?" I said, "I removed you." He stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds without speaking. I counted him the way I count joy spacing, automatically, without deciding to. Then he said, "Why?" I poured my coffee. I set the pot back on the burner. I picked up the mug, the white one, the same one, the one that has been in this kitchen longer than Aaron has been an adult, and I took a sip before I answered. "Because you're 28 years old," I said. "Because you make $74,000 a year, and because the car you called temporary has been paying for your gas since the year you graduated." Aaron said, "Dad, I didn't mean it like that. I was just joking around in front of Kelsey." "I know," I said, "and that's the problem. You've been joking about the man who's been carrying you, and you don't even know you're being carried." He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "That's not fair," he said. "It's completely fair," I said. "I've been paying $287 a month in gas on a card you were never supposed to still be using. That's $20,664 in 6 years, Aaron." I did the math on a Wednesday. The kitchen was quiet. The coffee maker clicked off with its small mechanical sound. Somewhere on Birchwood Lane a car door shut, and someone laughed, and then it was quiet again. Aaron sat down at the table. He put his hands flat on the surface, the way he used to do when he was 12, and had been caught in a lie about homework. He said, "I didn't know it was that much." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's the other problem." I did not raise my voice. I did not lecture. I am not a man who makes speeches. I said what I had to say, and then I stood at the counter with my coffee and let the silence do the rest. Aaron sat at that table for 14 minutes. I know because the clock on the stove said 6:22 when he sat down and 6:36 when he stood up. In those 14 minutes, he said very little. He asked if I was angry. I said no. He asked if I wanted him to pay me back. I said that wasn't the point. He asked what the point was. I said, "The point is that you stood in my driveway and told a woman you're trying to impress that the car belonging to the man who pays for your gas is a joke. And it didn't even occur to you, not when you said it, not the next day, not the day after that. It occurred to you when the car declined." He was quiet for a while. I let him be quiet. I have learned over 22 years of contracting that most problems solve themselves if you stop talking and let the structure settle. He looked at the French press on the shelf. He looked at the label maker on the counter. He looked at all the small things in my kitchen that have been there longer than his career and cost less than 1 month the gas I was paying for. I could see him doing math he had never done before, not the numbers, but the other kind, the kind where you add up what a person has given you and realize the total is larger than anything you've given back. He said, "Mom never paid for anything, did she?" It wasn't a question. It was a realization that had been sitting in the back of his mind for 19 years and had just now found the words to walk through. I said, "No, she didn't." And you just kept going. "That is what fathers do," I said, "until it's time to stop." He was quiet again. Then he said something I didn't expect. He said, "I used to think the reason you never bought a new car was because you couldn't afford one." I let that sit in the room for a moment. Then I said, "I could have bought a new car any year for the last 10 years. I didn't because the one I have works. That's a different thing." "Yeah," he said, I'm starting to get that. He nodded, not the performative nod. The real one. The one where the jaw tightens and the eyes go somewhere else for a moment, and you can see the boy inside the man processing something the man doesn't want to feel. He said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I said, "I know." He stood up. He walked to the side door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and said, without turning around, "The Civic's a good car." I said, "I know that too." He left. I washed the mug. I dried it. I set it on the second shelf where it goes. 3 months passed. I want to tell you what didn't happen, because what doesn't happen is sometimes a story. Aaron did not call me every Sunday the way he used to when he needed something. He called me every other Wednesday, which was new. The calls were shorter. They were about things that didn't involve money, a project at work, a restaurant he tried with Kelsey, a question about whether I thought he should refinance his car loan. I told him to talk to his bank. He did. He called me back the following Wednesday and told me what they said and asked if the rate sounded reasonable. It did. I told him so. He started paying for his own gas. He mentioned it once in November, not as a complaint, just as an observation. "Gas is expensive, Dad." I said, "Yes, it is." He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He started paying for his own phone, which I had also been covering and which he apparently did not realize until Bill arrived in November with a past due notice. That one cost me a conversation I wasn't expecting, but it went faster than the first. He said, "Was I on your phone plan too?" I said, "Since 2020. He said, "Jesus, Dad." I said, "Language." He laughed. It was the first time he had laughed at something I said since the driveway, and it sounded different. It sounded like it had weight in it. Dennis called me in late November and asked how things were going. I told him Aaron was paying his own bills. Dennis said, "Good." I said, "He's calling on Wednesdays now." Dennis said, "That's better than Sundays. Sundays are for asking. Wednesdays are for talking." That is the kind of sentence Dennis says that doesn't sound like much when you hear it. But 2 hours later you're standing at the kitchen counter, and it lands on you like something that was always true, but needed someone else to say out loud. In December, Aaron came for Christmas. He brought Kelsey. She brought a bottle of wine and a small wrapped box. Inside was a keychain, a miniature silver Honda Civic. She'd had it custom-made from a shop online for $34. On the back it said, $143K and counting. I held it in my palm for a moment. It was small and precise and heavier than you'd expect. Aaron was watching me from across the kitchen. I don't know what he saw in my face, but whatever was made him look away and then look back. I said, "Thank you." I said it to Kelsey, but I looked at Aaron when I said it. I hung it on my key ring that evening. It's still there. I am sitting on the porch on Birchwood Lane as I tell you this. It is early March. The grass is not yet green, but it is thinking about it. The rose bushes along the fence are bare, but I can see the small red buds forming at the joints where last year's growth meets this year's possibility. My coffee is in the white mug. The Civic is in the driveway, 143,000 miles, and the keychain hanging from the ignition. The tools are in the garage, labeled and sorted. The 3 socket wrenches my father gave me still in front of the bin where they belong. Aaron calls on Wednesdays now, not because he needs something, because he wants to. Last week he asked me if I'd help him look a used truck he's thinking about buying. A 2019 Ford Ranger with 62,000 miles, listed at $24,500 from a lot in Kettering. He asked me what I thought a fair price was. I told him to check the Kelley Blue Book and then offer $1,500 less. He said, "Is that what you do?" I said, "That's what I did with the Civic." He said, "And look how that turned out." I could hear him smiling through the phone. I smiled too. I didn't tell him that. I want to be honest with you. Removing my son from that credit card at 2:15 in the morning was not satisfying. It was not a victory. It was the kind of thing that feels like pulling a splinter out of your own hand. Necessary, painful in a small and precise way, and followed by a strange emptiness where the irritation used to be. You don't celebrate pulling a splinter. You just notice that your hand works better afterward. And then you notice the small scar where the splinter was. And you carry that scar quietly because it is yours. And it is the proof that something was lodged in you for a long time and you finally had the sense to take it out. Some men spend their lives trying to teach their children what things cost. The price of gas, the price of rent, the price of a phone bill, the price of standing in your father's driveway and calling his life a joke in front of a woman he's never met. I don't know if Aaron learned all of that. I don't know if one declined gas card and one quiet conversation at a kitchen table can undo 6 years of being carried without knowing it. But he learned enough to start paying for his own gas. He learned enough to call on Wednesdays. And he learned enough to sit across from a woman at an Etsy checkout page and let her buy his father a $34 keychain. That tells me, in its small and precise way, that my son has been paying attention. The hardest thing about being a father is knowing when to stop carrying. Not because the load is too heavy, because the person you're carrying will never learn to walk until you set them down. And the second hardest thing is standing there afterward, watching them stumble and keeping your hands at your sides. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of Quiet House Stories. I will see you on the next one.